The Krill took a human hostage. Honestly, that's when I knew they'd already lost. Not the battle, mind you, the war. See, with humans, it's never really about the immediate skirmish. It's about the long, long game, played with a patience, and well, let's just call it a willingness to appear utterly clueless, that confounds even the most seasoned xenostrategists. My name's Joran, and in the grand scheme of things, I'm nobody. A glorified xenoanthropologist working for the United Stellar Coalition, or USC if you're feeling chatty. My job? Study alien cultures, try to understand what makes them tick before they either join us or try to vaporize us. Most of my colleagues focused on troop deployments, shield harmonics, and warp drive optimizations. Me? I read their poetry, listened to their music, and tried to figure out why they put pickles on everything. Which is how I found myself staring at a grainy holographic image of a kid who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the universe. The kid was human, 16, maybe 17 cycles. His name was Kai, and according to the intel reports flashing across my console, the Krill had snatched him during a raid on a newly established human settlement near, well, let's just say it was near Earth. Nothing fancy, mind you. Just a cluster of hydroponic farms and research outposts clinging to a particularly unremarkable asteroid. The Krill, they were another story. Chitinous, aggressive, with a fondness for bioengineered weaponry that made even the most battle-hardened Gortha mercenary queasy. They'd been expanding aggressively along the USC border for decades, gobbling up weakly defended systems and generally being a galactic nuisance. Praetor Thrax, the Krill commander in charge of this little incursion, was a real piece of work. Arrogance practically oozed from his every mandible. His demands, delivered via subspace communique, were laughably predictable. Territory concessions along the USC Krill border, a few choice mining rights, and a formal apology for trespassing on rightfully Krill-claimed sectors. You know, standard galactic bully stuff. Oh, and of course, he wanted it all in exchange for the safe return of Kai. He even included a hollow image of the kid. Pale, wide-eyed, looking like he'd just realized he'd left the stove on back home. Utterly unremarkable. The USC Council, as always, was in a state of near panic. Half the representatives, mostly the Blargonian Warhawks, wanted to vaporize Thrax and his entire fleet. The other half, led by the perpetually spineless Zelphidian delegation, proposed appeasement, offering up some useless trade concessions to appease the Krill's insatiable appetite for galactic real estate. Me, I just sat back in my cramped little office at the edge of the galactic rim, sipping my synth caf and watching the drama unfold on my console. Everyone was so focused on the obvious threat. The Krill warships, the territory demands, the looming specter of interstellar war. But they were missing something crucial. Something that only a decade spent knee-deep in human culture could reveal. What they failed to realize about this situation wasn't in the Krill demands at all, but on the human they were holding. See, the real story wasn't about Thrax's arrogance, or the Council's dithering, or even the Krill's penchant for turning sentient beings into nutrient paste. Nope. It was about Kai and just how spectacularly the Krill had misread the situation. Because humans, well, humans are masters of asymmetric warfare. They don't fight fair. They don't play by the rules. They turn perceived weaknesses into strengths, weaponize bureaucracy, and in this case, we're about to weaponize the seemingly inconsequential life of a single, scared teenager. They were about to prove the accuracy of the old Earth saying. They were about to start a war. I pulled up Kai's file, a standard bio with a few basic details about the human. Nothing stood out. The kid seemed ordinary, no remarkable skills or background to be considered for military purposes. But still, my gut told me otherwise. As I looked at the teen's profile, I knew something extraordinary was about to happen. The Krill, in their infinite arrogance, had just tripped the first domino in a chain reaction they were utterly unprepared for. Because they took a human hostage, And as any seasoned observer of humanity will tell you, that's when the real fun begins. The waiting had begun, and the true nature of humanity was about to show its face in the galaxy. But what exactly was that nature? It was a question that would keep me up at night for cycles to come. The waiting game started almost immediately, and it was even more chaotic than I'd anticipated. It wasn't a simple case of the USC Council bickering. It was a full-blown galactic circus. The Blargonians predictably wanted to turn the entire Krill sector into a supernova-sized parking lot, ranting about Krill insolence and defending USC honor. The Zelphidians, equally predictably, proposed offering the Krill more territory than they'd originally asked for, arguing that a sat. Isfied Krill is a less stabby Krill. Honestly, dealing with galactic politics made studying the mating rituals of space slugs seem like a relaxing vacation. I, of course, threw my 2 cents into the ring, which mostly consisted of getting shouted down by pretty much everyone. "Quiet diplomacy, Joran," Counselor Vorak, a particularly bulbous Blargonian, bellowed. "Are you suggesting we send them a strongly worded poem?" I tried to explain my theory, the whole humans playing possum thing, but it was like trying to explain quantum physics to a particularly dense rock. They just couldn't grasp the concept of a species intentionally appearing weaker than they actually were. To them, strength was all about plasma cannons and shield harmonics. Subtlety, deception, it was all alien to them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I managed to convince a few of the less excitable members of the council to at least consider my proposal. Quiet diplomacy, I argued, meant publicly expressing our concern for Kai's safety and condemning Thrax's actions, but taking no overt military action. No fleet deployments, no saber-rattling, just watching, waiting, giving the humans room to maneuver. The council, naturally, watered down my proposal to the point of near invisibility. They issued a strongly worded statement, sent a token humanitarian aid package to the human colony, which I fully expected the Krill to confiscate, and then promptly went back to arguing about trade regulations. Thrax, meanwhile, was getting impatient. He'd expected a swift, decisive response from the USC, either outright capitulation or a glorious, honorable battle. What he didn't expect was nothing. The silence from the USC was deafening, and it clearly rattled him. I could practically feel his frustration radiating across subspace. And that's when the accidents started. Small things at first. A power surge on a Krill outpost, leaving half the lights flickering and the nutrient paste dispensers sputtering. A navigation error that sent a Krill supply freighter careening into a minor asteroid, scattering Grobnar rations across the void. Nothing major, nothing that could be directly linked to human involvement, but definitely annoying. The kind of thing that slowly drives a commander with a fragile ego completely batty. Then things started to escalate. The accidents started to become more frequent and targeted. Comms relays mysteriously failing, leaving Krill warships temporarily out of contact. Fuel lines developing, unexplained leaks. I even heard a rumor about a shipment of Thrax's favorite bioengineered beetle snacks mysteriously turning into a swarm of flesh-eating parasites, though that might have been wishful thinking on my part. The reports trickled into my office, each one more subtle, more ingenious, more utterly human than the last. It was like watching a master craftsman at work, subtly dismantling a machine piece by piece. And the beauty of it was the Krill couldn't prove a thing. They couldn't trace the sabotage back to Earth. It was all deniable, all plausible, all perfectly frustrating for Thrax. I remember one report in particular about a Krill patrol ship that had its gravity generators reversed, causing all the crew's Grobnar rations to float to the ceiling and stick there. Utter chaos. It was childish, almost comedic, but incredibly effective. I actually chuckled out loud when I read it, and that's when I realized something even more profound was happening. The accidents weren't just annoying the krill, they were inspiring something else. Subtly, almost imperceptibly, other human colonies and even some krill-oppressed worlds began to display similar acts of defiance. A shipment of medical supplies accidentally rerouted to a refugee camp. A krill propaganda broadcast mysteriously replaced with a looped recording of, well, let's just say a rather unflattering impression of Predator Thrax done with squawking space chickens. It was a ripple effect spreading outwards from that unremarkable asteroid where Kai was being held prisoner. A subtle, almost invisible wave of resistance, fueled by human ingenuity and a shared sense of, well, let's call it inspired mischief. And then it hit me, Kai, it wasn't just some random teenager they'd grabbed. He was a catalyst, a linchpin in a plan far grander and far more devious than I could have ever imagined. And the krill, in their infinite short-sightedness, had given him the perfect stage to perform on. I had to know what was coming. My synth calf was long gone, my office was a mess of data chips and half-eaten ration bars, and I hadn't slept in what felt like cycles. But I was hooked. This wasn't just about some territorial dispute. It was about something far more important. Humanity's unique talent for turning the tables on anyone foolish enough to underestimate them. What had begun with the simple kidnapping of a teenager was about to turn into something that the entire galaxy would remember. Thrax, predictably, didn't take kindly to being turned into a galactic laughingstock. The reports I was getting from my sources within the Krill command structure painted a picture of, well, let's just say a commander on the verge of a complete nervous breakdown. He tightened security around Kai, doubled patrols, and started interrogating his own officers, convinced there was a USC spy in his midst. Which, knowing the humans, there probably was, but that wasn't the point. The increased security, ironically, only fueled the human resistance. It was like they thrived on oppression. The more Thrax squeezed, the more inventive and the more audacious their acts of defiance became. It got to the point where even the Grobnars were joining in, staging silent protests by refusing to eat their nutrient paste, which, admittedly, was probably more of a blessing than a sacrifice. But the most fascinating development was the coded messages that started popping up on interstellar comm channels. They looked, at first glance, like nothing more than random snippets of human pop culture. Old Earth songs, clips from ancient sitcoms, even, and I kid you not, recipes for something called macaroni and cheese. My colleagues dismissed them as meaningless noise, the digital equivalent of space dust. But I knew better. I'd spent too long immersed in the strange, wonderful world of human culture. I recognized the patterns. The subtle shifts in tempo, the carefully chosen imagery, the seemingly innocuous lyrics that, when analyzed, contained hidden meanings or called to action. It was a language of resistance, a symphony of subtle signals designed to communicate across vast interstellar distances, bypassing krill sensors and inspiring acts of solidarity and defiance. A particularly catchy jingle from a human advertisement, for example, turned out to be a coded instruction for disabling krill surveillance drones. A snippet of dialogue from a cheesy Earth holovid was a call for striking krill supply lines. Even Kai, locked away in the heart of Thrax's flagship, found a way to contribute. A smuggled message, hidden inside a requisition order for, of all things, extra-strength hair gel, provided detailed schematics of the ship's engine room, making it, shall we say, remarkably susceptible to accidental malfunctions. The more I analyzed these messages, the more I realized just how brilliant and how utterly human this strategy was. Humans weren't just resisting. They were communicating, coordinating, and inspiring others to join their cause, all while appearing completely harmless. It was a masterclass in deception, a carefully orchestrated symphony of subtle rebellion that was slowly but surely unraveling the krill's entire operation. One of the most remarkable examples was the adoption of a seemingly nonsensical phrase, "the ducks at dawn." At first, It meant nothing to anyone outside of human culture, but it became the battle cry that brought other species to life as time went on. Praetor Thrax, of course, was completely oblivious. He saw the accidents, he saw the minor acts of defiance, but he dismissed them as insignificant, the ramblings of a primitive species too stupid to understand the might of the Krill Imperium. He was so focused on controlling Kai, on squeezing concessions from the USC, that he completely missed the forest for the trees. That's when I understood just how far the humans were planning to go. They weren't just aiming to get Kai back, or to win a few territorial skirmishes. They were playing a much larger game, one that involved destabilizing the Krill Imperium from within, inspiring rebellion across the galaxy, and ultimately, well, let's just say creating a whole lot of trouble for anyone foolish enough to underestimate them. The coded messages, the subtle acts of sabotage, the seemingly random adoption of macaroni and cheese as a symbol of galactic resistance, it all pointed to one thing: humans were masters of playing dumb. They were experts at lulling their opponents into a false sense of security, making them believe they were dealing with a weak, easily manipulated species. And once they had their enemy exactly where they wanted them, that's when they'd spring the trap. My contact within the USC's Clandestine Operations Division confirmed my suspicions. They were getting ready to move, using the Human Resistance Network as their eyes and ears. The plan, as always, was audacious, bordering on insane. But knowing the humans, I had no doubt they'd pull it off. The ripple effect was now a tidal wave, and Thrax's fleet was about to be swept away. My role was simply to observe, to document, and to try desperately to keep the rest of the USC from doing anything, well, stupid. Which, considering the USC's track record, was a full-time job in itself. But I was ready. I was armed with my synth calf, my data chips, and my ever-growing understanding of human behavior. It was time to watch the human plan unfold, and to prepare myself for the sheer, unadulterated chaos that was inevitably about to follow. Because with humans, it's never just a war, it's always a goddamn revolution. By the time the accidents were targeting Thrax's personal quarters, let's just say his sleep cycle was severely disrupted by a series of increasingly elaborate pranks involving bioluminescent paint and modified cleaning drones. The USC finally decided to act. But it wasn't the full-scale assault the Blargonians craved. It was something far more precise and far more unsettling. My contact from the Clandestine Operations Division, a human who went only by the designation, well, let's call him the human liaison, contacted me with a coded message that set my antennae twitching. The ducks are swimming. It was the signal. The USC was launching its operation to rescue Kai. The official story, of course, was that the USC had finally succumbed to public pressure, and were deploying a crack team of Special Forces operatives to extract the poor, defenseless human teenager from the clutches of the evil Krill. It was a good story, well-crafted and perfectly designed to appeal to the USC's, shall we say, less discerning citizens. The reality, as always, was far more complex and far more interesting. The USC wasn't just rescuing Kai. They were exploiting a carefully crafted opportunity, using information subtly fed to them by the Human Resistance Network that had sprung up around Thrax's flagship. I managed to snag a spot on one of the observation vessels, a small, cloaked frigate that allowed me to monitor the operation from a safe distance. What I witnessed was a display of military precision that even the Krill, in their bioengineered arrogance, couldn't match. The USC strike team, a mix of Gortha commandos and surprisingly agile Zelphidian infiltrators, moved through Thrax's flagship with surgical efficiency. They bypassed security checkpoints, disabled surveillance systems, and neutralized Krill patrols with a speed and precision that bordered on the uncanny. They were like ghosts, moving through the ship as if they knew every nook and cranny, every hidden passage, every secret compartment. Which, of course, they did, thanks to Kai and his network of, well, let's just call them inspired helpers. As the strike team reached Kai's location, a heavily guarded detention cell near the ship's engine room, I couldn't help but feel a surge of, well, let's call it paternal anxiety. I'd become strangely invested in this whole affair, and I desperately wanted to see Kai make it out alive. The assault on the detention cell was swift and decisive. The Krill guards, caught completely off guard, didn't stand a chance. The door was breached, the cell was cleared, and Kai just stood there looking utterly unimpressed. But it was what happened after the rescue that truly blew my mind. As the strike team prepared to extract Kai from the ship, they stumbled upon something unexpected. A hidden data storage unit tucked away behind a false panel in Kai's cell. The data unit, as it turned out, contained a complete schematic of Thrax's flagship, every system, every subsystem, every hidden compartment. It was a treasure trove of intelligence, and it was far too detailed, far too comprehensive to have been compiled by a single teenager, even a particularly intelligent one. That's when the human liaison contacted me directly, his voice calm, almost amused. "Joran," he said, "I think you'll find our young Mr. Kai was a bit more proactive than we initially let on." He paused, letting the implication sink in. It turned out Kai hadn't just been a victim. He'd been an agent, a highly trained operative planted inside Thrax's flagship with a specific mission: to gather intelligence, destabilize the Krill command structure, and prepare the way for a USC rescue operation. He hadn't been captured, he'd allowed himself to be captured. The pieces all clicked into place. The accidental malfunctions, the coded messages, the widespread acts of defiance. It had all been orchestrated by Kai from within the heart of the Krill flagship. He'd used his apparent helplessness, his seemingly unremarkable demeanor, to lull Thrax into a false sense of security, turning his captivity into a strategic advantage. It was a brilliant, audacious, and utterly terrifying display of human ingenuity, and it left me speechless. I had spent years studying this species, and I was still constantly surprised by their capacity for, well, let's just call it strategic deception. That and being ridiculously dedicated to Hairgel as a hiding place. As the USC strike team safely extracted Kai from the flagship, leaving behind a trail of bewildered Krill officers and malfunctioning equipment, I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a checkmate. The Krill, in their infinite arrogance, had played right into humanity's hands. They had taken a human hostage, and in doing so had unwittingly signed their own death warrant. But the chess game wasn't over yet. Kai was off the board, and the final act was about to begin. The pieces were in place, the trap was sprung, and as the USC fleet moved in to mop up the remaining Krill forces, I knew that the galaxy was about to witness something truly extraordinary. The human liaison simply said to me through the comms on my observational vessel, "This is just the beginning, Joran. Now the board is really set." The gravity in his tone worried me slightly, but I pressed on as I wanted to be part of it to the very end. Because they had taken a human hostage, and while that was something that had to be resolved, it had also provided the distraction needed. But what would humanity do? What was their end goal? And could anyone, especially me, hope to really comprehend the next steps? I had to hope that my USC affiliation wouldn't get in the way. The aftermath of Kai's extraction was swift, brutal even. The USC, emboldened by the Krill's disarray and the detailed intelligence Kai had provided, moved in with ruthless efficiency. What had been a minor territorial dispute quickly escalated into a full-blown offensive, with the USC systematically dismantling the Krill's presence in the sector. It wasn't a glorious space battle, filled with daring maneuvers and heroic sacrifices. It was more like a pest control. The USC, of course, made sure to put on a good show for the galactic media, emphasizing their commitment to peace. and their unwavering dedication to protecting innocent civilians from Krill aggression. They even released a holovid of Kai, looking remarkably well-rested considering his recent captivity, thanking the USC for their, well, let's just say timely intervention. Thrax's career, needless to say, was over. He was hauled back to Krill's space to face. Well, I shudder to think what awaited him. And the Krill Imperium, humbled and humiliated, was forced to sign a series of treaties that effectively neutered their expansionist ambitions in the region. The USC predictably basked in the glow of its newfound victory, patting itself on the back and congratulating itself on its strategic brilliance. They had, after all, successfully defended their territory, liberated an oppressed human, and taught the Krill a valuable lesson about the dangers of underestimating the power of, well, let's just call it diplomacy. But me, I wasn't buying it. Something about the whole affair still felt off. Too clean, too efficient, too perfect. That's why I requested a meeting with the human liaison. I needed to understand what had really happened, to get a glimpse behind the carefully constructed facade of the USC's official narrative. The meeting took place in a nondescript conference room at a location I'm not at liberty to disclose. The human liaison, as always, was impeccably dressed, his face etched with a weariness that seemed to belie his age. He offered me a cup of synth caf, which, I suspected, was probably laced with some kind of human stimulant, and sat down across from me, his gaze sharp and knowing. "So, Joran," he said, his voice calm and measured, "you have questions?" It wasn't a question, it was a statement. He already knew what I wanted to ask. "The Krill, the rescue, Kai, it all felt too convenient," I said, carefully choosing my words. "Like it was all orchestrated." The human liaison smiled, a slow, almost predatory grin that sent a chill down my spine. "Orchestrated? Joran, that's a rather cynical view, isn't it? We simply responded to an act of aggression, defended our citizens, and upheld our commitment to peace and justice." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But Kai," I pressed, "he allowed himself to be captured. He had to know what was coming. He was a tool." The human liaison's eyes narrowed slightly. "Kai was a volunteer, Joran, a highly skilled, highly dedicated volunteer who understood the risks involved. He believed in the cause, in the need to protect humanity's interests. And that cause, as you put it, just happened to involve manipulating an entire interstellar conflict for your own benefit," I asked, my voice rising slightly. The human liaison leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Joran, in the game of galactic politics, you either play the board or you become the board. We humans prefer to play." He stated it like it was that simple. "This wasn't about rescuing Kai," I said slowly, the realization dawning on me. "It was about destabilizing the Krill, seizing valuable territory, and projecting an image of strength to the rest of the galaxy. Kai was just a pawn of a masterstroke in a complex game of interstellar politics. He wasn't a victim, he was expendable." The human liaison said nothing. His silence spoke volumes. It was what humans called a non-denial denial. Kai knew what was coming and accepted the task without question. An entire new level of sacrifice I did not have the clearance to understand. The human liaison finally spoke. His tone was carefully neutral, his words measured with the precision of a seasoned diplomat. "Joran, you're a xenoanthropologist. You study cultures. Tell me, what have you learned about humanity in all your years of observation?" I thought for a moment, my mind racing. "That you're resilient, resourceful, and utterly unpredictable. That you can turn any situation to your advantage, no matter how dire. That you're masters of deception, capable of lulling your enemies into a false sense of security." The human liaison smiled, that same unsettling grin that sent shivers down my spine. "And that, Joran, is precisely why we're still here. We humans are simple creatures at heart. We just know how to inspire a bit of chaos." He paused, his eyes glinting with something that I couldn't quite decipher. Admiration, pity, Perhaps a touch of, well, let's just call it strategic amusement. As I left the meeting, the full weight of what had just transpired crashed down on me. The USC, in its infinite self-importance, thought it had outsmarted the Krill. They thought they had orchestrated a brilliant military victory, showcasing their power and influence to the rest of the galaxy. But they were wrong. They were just pawns in a much larger game, a game that was being played by forces they didn't understand and couldn't possibly hope to control. The humans had taken the universe for fools, so they could be left alone in their own space. But that would not be allowed, which was why the next comment from the human liaison chilled me. The ducks might be done swimming, but they are now laying eggs. The humans had allowed themselves to be underestimated. They had allowed the Krill to believe they were weak, easily manipulated. They had even sacrificed one of their own, all for the sake of achieving a larger strategic objective. And the scariest part wasn't their ruthlessness or their deception, but their patience. Their willingness to wait, to plan, to execute their strategy with a precision that bordered on the supernatural. And what the end result was, it wasn't just about territory or power or even security. It was about something far more profound, demonstrating to the galaxy in no uncertain terms that humanity was not to be trifled with. That they were a force to be reckoned with, a species capable of playing the long game and of turning the tables on anyone foolish enough to underestimate their potential. I returned to my office, the grainy image of Kai still burned into my mind. He wasn't a victim, he wasn't a hero, he was something else entirely. A symbol, a signal. A reminder that in the vast, chaotic universe, the most dangerous species weren't the ones with the biggest guns, but the ones with the cleverest minds and the most unwavering resolve. And as I sat there, sipping my now lukewarm synth-caf, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe, and perhaps, just perhaps, a touch of fear. The galaxy, I suspected, had no idea what was coming. The humans had played their hand perfectly, and the game was far from over.